Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Day in Warbird History. 10th of May 1940. The Maidagen have begun with the invasion of the Netherlands. By the 14th, it is 3 days longer than the Germans expected the invasion to last. They had hoped for a 24-hour victory, but the Dutch have halted their advances, hoping to hold back the Germans until the Allies can come to their aid. However, Dutch forces are mostly infantry. Although trained and prepared, they have no armor, few anti-tank weapons, and the Militaire Luchtvaart is in ruins. They make the most of natural defenses and fixed fortifications to protect the port cities of Noord-Holland, Zuid-Holland, and Zeeland, while slowing the advance in the Utrechtse Heuvelrug that stretches across the middle of the country. However, the Grebbelinia's defenses have begun to fall. The Randstad, the area around Amsterdam, Den Haag, and Rotterdam, is still out of Hitler's grasp as his troops are stopped at the Nieuwe Maas and the defenses around Utrecht. On the 13th, Queen Wilhelmina evacuates to London to preserve leadership. A government in exile is created while local civilian and military forces are entrusted with the homeland, Dutch East Indies, and New World colonies. The Dutch know they can't last, and with every German shell, grenade, and rifle round, they are slowly driven back to the sea. Germany cannot afford to wait, as her guns, panzers, troops, and airmen are needed to help in the drive through France. The possibility of drawn-out fighting in Dutch cities frightens his commanders, who recall their destroyed panzers in Polish city streets. Advancing slowly across the Dutch countryside towards Holland, they are proceeding at a snail's pace. Meanwhile, the Dutch see that the Allies are not likely to come to their aid as they are pushed back through Flanders and Picardy, and they too fear a close-in fight with the Germans. On the 14th, General Schmidt, who is facing Rotterdam, and his Dutch counterparts begin to negotiate for the Dutch surrender. Schmidt had asked for close air support in his planned assault on Rotterdam should his negotiations for a Dutch surrender fall through, but he does not expect this to be necessary. Both sides hope to minimize civilian casualties and destruction. Instead, as the Dutch delegation crosses the Willemsbrug back to their own lines, 90 Heinkel 111s that Goering sent to carpet bomb the city arrive overhead. The order to abort the strike was either ignored or intercepted. Goering wanted the city destroyed in hopes of forcing a Dutch surrender, regardless of what Schmidt might have wanted. His devotion to duet has developed into destruction of the medieval city. Buildings collapse from over 200 tons of high explosives landing on the defenseless city, whose surrender had only moments before been promised safety by the German army. Over a square mile of the city was reduced to ruins or flattened. Nearly 25,000 domiciles, 3,000 commercial enterprises, 24 churches, and over 60 schools were all destroyed. Over 1,000 Netherlanders were killed, and at least 85,000 homeless. Dutch hope was shattered as Rotterdam's destruction became a warning to those who would stand in Hitler's way. Although General Schmidt sent his heartfelt apologies to the Dutch, a move which would make others in German high command look with scorn upon his latent sense of honor, it was much too late. With their queen gone, the anti-air assets concentrated in Den Haag, and a 1,000-year-old city of Rotterdam set to ruin by Goering's Luftwaffe in a matter of minutes, the Dutch give up the ghost. Nederlandse Opperbevelhebber Henry Winkelmann, the commander who managed to hold the Germans back beyond all odds, met with his generals and agreed to surrender forces under his command that same afternoon. Dismayed by what was seen as double talk by the Germans, they had agreed to surrender. Goering's bloodlust had paid off. Traveling to Resort to meet with the Germans, in a matter of hours Winkelmann would sign the documents of surrender. The Dutch, who had fought the Spanish and the French for centuries, have now fallen beneath the shadow of the very Germans who in the last war had respected their neutrality and whom they saw as little different from themselves. The ceremony is simple and takes only under an hour. In the announcement of capitulation, General Winkelmann makes it clear that he was only surrendering to save his innocent countrymen from another strike. Hij staat voor mij onomstootelijk vast, dat dit belang medebrengt, dat die volstrekt ongelijke strijd moet worden gestaakt, opdat niet nog meer onschuldige slachtoffers vallen. The British and French now look at their hopes to hold the Low Countries dashed as they drop their jaws at Guernica repeated before them by the Zweite Luftflotte. Something must be done. That same afternoon of the 15th, Churchill makes it clear to the French that no more fighters will be sent their way. He fears a Rotterdam of his own, and this is only his 5th day of being Prime Minister. The Council appreciates the German victory as a sign that she must protect herself from encroachment by air. After all, France is already falling as the 3-day Battle of Sedan is won by the Germans that same afternoon, and forces are flooding into France in their massive Bewegungskrieg. Ineffectual French multi-role planes are intercepted by German fighters at every point and cut down piecemeal in their attempts to stop the armored horde. They search for targets they can barely see and lack the training and experience to destroy. Ferry battles try to take out the Sedan bridges and are chopped to bits. It is time for the medium bombers to strike. Strategic bombing has been limited to a few harbor raids and leaflet dropping. Leaflet raids are boasted about by the British press. In the French opinion, this was merely a matter of la drôle de guerre. For the pilots and crew, these raids are both dangerous and frustrating. They face the dangers of flak, fighters, and night navigation, all for dropping paper over their enemy. The first attempt at precision bombing was carried out at Ruhr on the island of Sylt. Lit by a setting moon, facing no opposition and enjoying a clear night, 41 bombers were sent one at a time for 6 hours to attack the airstrip, floatplane slipways, hangars, and other targets. It was counted as a rousing success. That morning, photo reconnaissance planes brought back the film showing the extent of the damage. The bombers had had no effect whatsoever on Ruhr. In his directive of 13 April, Air Marshal Porter wrote off any possibility of finding a target at night under any circumstances. The die had been cast. Britain makes a fateful decision. Industrial and civilian targets will now be bombed until Germany surrenders. Bomber Command is made up primarily of 3 medium bombers: the Handley Page Hampden, the Armstrong Whitworth Whitley, and the Vickers Wellington. These were all designed according to the same principles that had led the Germans to build their U-88, Do-17, and Heinkel 111. The RAF has only had a monoplane bomber force for a little over 3 years when World War II breaks out, and her bombing doctrine is both undeveloped and inflexible to the demands of the war they now face. They had expected to fly no further than Paris or the German coast. Now they must penetrate the ever-expanding Reich. The largest of these 3 bombers, the Whitley, was the first to enter service and had seen the most combat flights, although mostly limited to Friesland and Niedersachsen. The crews are still inexperienced and lack navigation and bombing skills. She was designed for night operations, although only a single squadron was trained to fly night raids by the outbreak of war. She is protected by a single Vickers gun in the nose turret, 1, 2, or 4 rifle-caliber Browning machine guns in the tail turret, and the 80 built to the Mark III standard have a retractable ventral dustbin position as well. Most would be of the Mark V, however, with 4 guns in the tail, 12 250-pound or 2 500-pound bombs, a top speed of 230 miles per hour, and a range of 1,650 miles. The Hampden first entered service in June 1938. Designed to be a high-performance medium bomber and built with a similar layout to the Dornier Do-17 and for a similar purpose, the Hampden was the first aircraft to execute a bombing mission on German soil. Her crew were all on the front of the fuselage, she was relatively small, and she had a clear view of what was around her. This is also the first aircraft my great-uncle flew in the war before switching over to mosquitoes, in case anyone wondered why the closing image in these videos is of myself with a Mossy. Better defended than the Whitley, she had a fixed machine gun in the nose and between 3 and 5 flexible guns in nose, dorsal, and ventral positions. She also carried more bombs than the Whitley, with up to 4,000 pounds of ordnance, including bombs, mines, or a single torpedo. A top speed of 247 miles per hour, wonderful visibility, excellent maneuverability for a plane her size, and a range of 1,720 miles. She was also unfortunately cramped and no match for German fighters. Of the 3, the Vickers Wellington would be one of the RAF's primary bombers well into the war, only being replaced through 1943 by the famous Avro Lancaster. Production would end in 1945, and they would serve into the 1950s. The sturdy geodesic frame helped her sustain damage that would destroy other aircraft, although her two motors limited her performance and she was still highly vulnerable. Slow, with a top speed of a mere 235 miles per hour, she also had a tremendous range of 2,550 miles. She could also carry as much as 4,500 pounds of bombs and was well defended with 6 to 8 rifle-caliber Browning machine guns in ventral, nose, and tail turrets, the ventral turret being retractable. Unfortunately, she lacked lateral and dorsal protection and had no self-sealing tanks. Believing in Dewey's theories on bombers always getting through thanks to speed, these were felt to be unlikely approaches for enemy interceptors. This would prove deadly on low-level night bombing missions over the years, just as the German bombers designed along the same principles would find. Fighters now outperformed bombers in every way. Mere rifle-caliber guns, especially so few of them, would do little to protect bombers from the Bf-109s and Bf-110s facing them on their way to drop their deadly loads. These would be the bombers sent out on that May evening for the first night strike against German industry. The strike was designed to be a response to Rotterdam's destruction and to the failing French defenses. Bombers were still restricted to industrial and infrastructure targets. Britain feared Germany would destroy her cities if they struck German cities with anything more than leaflets. More importantly, however, they needed to draw off the German strikes. Churchill believed that if they struck at German industry, the Germans would send bombers the way of Britain. Keeping fighters in Britain rather than sending them into the Gallic sausage grinder not only meant that the home Isles would not go without proper defense, but that the German bombers could be torn apart by British fighters, just as their own bombers had become Messerschmitt fodder. The raids were not made to succeed, but to provoke the Germans into dividing their air assets between France and Britain. The strike consisted of 99 aircraft, divided between 39 Wellingtons, 36 Hampdens, and 24 Whitleys. These were divided between 16 targets. Dortmund, Sterkrade, and Castrop-Rauxel were assigned 9 aircraft each. Smaller flights would attack the other 13 targets. Together with 6 Wellingtons and 6 Whitleys assigned to attack the German communication centers in Belgium, a total of 111 bombers would strike that night. This was the first night that over 100 bombers ever flew. These laughable numbers were not to be expected to smash the Germans to bits with so few planes assigned to each target, but they were designed to show the Germans that Churchill meant business. Churchill has thrown down the gauntlet and was challenging the Luftwaffe to take on the RAF. As the aircraft flew towards their targets, they encountered a problem familiar to many residents of industrial areas: smog. The night over the Ruhr was not clear, and the smog kept them from seeing the oil targets, against which 78 of them had been sent. Churchill's notion that attacking oil in transit would be more successful than attacking production sites was proven to be true. The 9 bombers sent against railway marshalling yards all caused significant damage to German rolling stock and trackways. Another 9 were sent against self-illuminating targets like blast furnaces, coke ovens, and steelworks. 38 other bombers would also strike at these alternates. These would only result in minor damage. Germany was surprised, to say the least, to see a farmer outside Köln was the victim of bombers which had destroyed a large dairy farm, rather than Dormachen's IG-Werk plant. Münster had 2 wounded civilians after it was hit by 6 bombs, and the pilot had claimed it was an alternate target. The next morning, the RAF was happy to see only 1 aircraft had been lost, and this was from a night navigation error resulting in a Wellington of No. 115 Squadron crashing into high ground. However, of the 78 bombers sent against oil plants, only 24 had found one to bomb, and none did any notable damage. 16 brought their bombs back to Britain, unable to find even one of the myriad of alternate targets. The first British strategic bombing strike of World War II was a dud. A raid the next night on oil targets by a half-dozen Hampdens and half-dozen Wellingtons was just as ineffective. Navigation skills were worse than poor, the targets were impossible to find, and the goal of drawing off the Luftwaffe had not been met. Rather, nuisance raids from the Luftwaffe would be launched while the overwhelming majority of strength was poured out onto the French forces retreating from Sedan in Belgium. On the 16th, the RAF agreed for 4 more fighter squadrons to go to France to calm demands and support a withdrawal, sending 8 flights that afternoon. When the French called for even more that same day, the RAF pointed out that the French had neither the air bases nor support personnel to keep even their own aircraft operational. Instead, 6 Hurricane squadrons would operate out of Essex over northern France to support the Hurricanes and Gladiators there. Limited by their fuel capacity to brief operations, this would foreshadow the limitations experienced by Bf-109s over England in a few short weeks. Meanwhile, the British Expeditionary Force had been ordered to retreat at night together with the Belgian forces as part of the general French retreat. Withdrawing in good order, the BAF fell back each night to the Seine, Dondres, and Escaut lines in succession. Only days into the German assault, the plans for the defense of Belgium and France were collapsing, and Britain knew it. In 3 days, Rotterdam had been destroyed, the Dutch surrendered, and the British were in retreat across Belgium and France. Sedan had fallen, the French Air Force was in a state of desperation, and Britain had made the first strategic bomb raid of the war. In the years to come, German nights would grow increasingly dangerous as the RAF decided it was better to bomb cities into dust than attempt precision raids. This fateful decision in May 1940 and its execution over the next 5 years are a topic which will be likely debated for generations to come. What the Dutch had tried to avoid, the Polish had suffered, and London had condemned when happening to cities like Warsaw and Rotterdam, would become their own policy for the next 5 years of hell, as Britain rained down death upon cities like Hamburg, Dresden, and Köln. Once more, thank you for tuning in. I hope everyone is enjoying my switch from captions to narration for the This Day in Warbird History. It's a lot more work, but I think it's worth it. So please do consider supporting these creations. Your contributions really do help with software, media, and hardware costs, and of course they're greatly appreciated. If you're interested, you can reach me on here, although subscriptions on Patreon start for as little as $3, and as soon as I start to get a few more subscribers, there's going to be exclusive content on there. In the meanwhile, please share this video with your friends and your groups if you liked it, and I really do hope that you share your thoughts and comments here. Always do remember to check in and see what you may have missed, look back at some of the older videos, and always look for new content as well. This is Claire, and I am the Warbird Mistress. Take care.